to the Vin Armani Show. We are streaming live on YouTube at youtube.com/VinArmani, also on Twitter and Periscope. At Vin Armani is my handle there. We are also proud members of the Activist Post Podcast Network, so you can check out all of our audio archives by visiting activistpost.com. You can also check us out on terrestrial radio, satellite, and streaming online at the Liberty Radio Network. That is LRN.FM. Big shout out to those guys. Hope you guys are doing well. So, it's Monday morning, 10 a.m. Pacific time, and we've got a great show for you today. My guest in the second hour is Bruce Fenton. He's the CEO of Chainstone Labs. He's also the host of the Satoshi Roundtable and a member of the board of quite a few companies, all related to blockchain. He is a blockchain securitization or securities on the blockchain expert. We recorded it a little early. He actually has to be on a plane right now. We recorded it earlier this morning, and I will tell you, this is a great interview. You guys are going to learn a lot, and I think you're really going to enjoy Bruce if you have not seen him speak before. Very dynamic guy, and also a New Hampshire resident, a free stater, so that's always good as well. In the first hour, we're going to talk a little bit about governance. Just some thoughts that I've had throughout the week, talking about Bitcoin and sort of how do we set up rules of the game so that the absolute best individuals are able to contribute the most to the most people without the threat of violence or the interaction of the state. So, big topics, big show. I think you guys are going to enjoy this. To help me get through all of these things, as always, my good friend, co-host and producer, Mr. Christian Reyes. Christian.
Good morning, Vin.
Good morning, sir.
How you doing?
I'm doing good, man. I'm doing very well. It's been a tumultuous week in dude, it's so difficult for me because I am now with Cointex going and everything, like full-time Bitcoin. That's it, right? So like my previous life, the previous brand of Vin Armani is completely retired. I pretty much knew that was going to happen when I moved from Vegas to New Hampshire. Like that was a conscious decision, and founding this company, focusing on that, because look, as I've said, it's not like there's some mystery. I mean, my public statements on this have been pretty clear over the last year and a half that it's like where I stand as a libertarian, as an anarchist, as a voluntarist, wanting to remove state violence from out of the lives of myself and my loved ones, and by that, everybody else as well, is that, I think that the greatest tool to do that is Bitcoin, is cryptocurrency, and that's where my focus has been, right? So it's like, this is what I've decided to devote the rest of my life to. The weird part about this is that, as we'll talk about with Daniel Krawitz next week when he comes on, we weren't able to have him last week, but maybe it's better because there's a build up to this. As we've talked about with Chris DeRose, as I talk about online, there's a group of us that is trying to, Bruce Fenton is another one of these individuals. When you sit and you talk with them, it's like we're all trying to figure out what the hell is this thing.
Yeah.
Like, we all all of the people that I named want this thing to move forward because we believe that it's better for humanity than the current system that we have. And that, as a matter of fact, it helps to take this system apart and replace it with a new one. All of us believe that, right? We're all libertarians. Not all of us are full blast voluntarists, like, let's take the state out of everything, or let's take it out now. I'm probably the most radical on that front. But everybody is like, there are a lot of problems, and there are preferable solutions that we could be pursuing if we are brave enough and if we so chose to do so. And like, for me, that's enough. I'm willing to roll with that.
Yep.
So what that has meant, though, the nature of this space and what it is that we're still trying to figure out and navigate, because it's so new, is there's no barrier to entry for participation. right? And
Right.
what participation means, I mean, it's the nature of Bitcoin, right? The idea is there's a layer of privacy for users, a layer of anonymity, certainly with other, maybe not total anonymity with Bitcoin, but you could get a lot of anonymity with Bitcoin, certainly a high level of privacy. But with
Right.
coins like Monero and other privacy coins, to a certain extent Dash, you can perhaps almost even get anonymity. Almost. And it's going to become more and more that. So it's like you can participate at a level that matters as an investor, as a user, as a merchant, with a high degree of privacy, high degree of anonymity, even as a miner, even as a developer, right? Because it's open source. There are
Yeah.
plenty, you go and you look at GitHub commits on projects, there are plenty that are commits of otherwise anonymous people. You know? So you can participate at every level of this ecosystem without even giving your name, right? That's a very low, there's no barrier to entry,
Right.
right? So I think for a lot of us, it's like, well, that's a good thing, right? Because that privacy is what stops the censorship, right? If somebody doesn't know who to censor, you can't censor the ideas, right? And you can't
Yeah.
censor the money, you can't censor the communication. That's what we're looking for. That's what's going to take the state out. The other thing about it is, though, it also becomes very difficult in that scenario to judge the validity and value of things
Yeah,
that people
absolutely.
are saying. You understand what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Because
Mm-hmm.
hand in hand with um, this is the whole entire reason within the financial system that they don't have anonymity, right? Like within a system of credit, like a centralized system of credit, you
Yeah.
can't have anonymity. You need a buyer history, like your credit
Right.
report, right?
Right.
The system works best in a centralized system, the less anonymity, because the merchant wants to be able to like trust this individual. This is what Satoshi was writing about in the white paper. The episode we had with Derek McGill, where we went over the white paper and then we talked with him about it, like this is what he's talking about, removing that layer, and that Bitcoin itself becomes that which you can trust. So therefore, don't worry about the background. Anonymous is
Right.
fine, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's on the technical side, right? Satoshi anticipated that and he got that right. But what he could not anticipate, what would be impossible for him to anticipate, because it's impossible with any technology, is you can't anticipate the meat space. You can't you can anticipate how humans might use the technology, but you can't anticipate how the use of that technology at a critical mass will change human behavior itself. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Like you could anticipate from a technical standpoint, from a standpoint of a network, from a standpoint of a user experience, how people might use Instagram.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like you could have user experience experts who will be like, well, if you put the button up here, they'll click it 10 times more often. And if you put it down
Right.
here, and if you let them link to friends in this way, and if you do likes instead of, and then if you don't allow, for instance, a decision to not allow outside links on Instagram, right? You can't just link to something. I honestly believe that the fact that you can't put a link to an outside link into the caption of an Instagram post is exactly the reason why you have people who are shilling on Instagram. It's exactly what makes Instagram posts valuable, because it's like, oh, here I am, I'm Kim Kardashian. I can only put one link. That's the link in my bio.
Right. Right.
You got to pay top dollar. It's like it's created scarcity.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to have scarcity in order to have value. Like if she could post a link in every single one that people could click through and that they could track, not as valuable at all.
No.
Not even close, right? So what Satoshi couldn't predict is that there's a low barrier to entry. it's a free market, so there's a lot of signaling. Like people are making their decisions on how they're going to act based on the sentiment of the market. Do people think this is good? Do people want something else?
Mm-hmm.
But you can't really know who it is that you're hearing say this. Is this a
Mm-hmm.
real person? Is this a sock puppet account? Is this person who they say they are? And even if they are who they say they are, do they have the background to be able
Or
to
the
actually say
intention.
this? Like, should
Hmm.
I be listening to them? Like, what are your
Right.
credentials?
Right. Or what is their intention?
What is your
Just like
intention?
just like what happened with the institutional money going into Bitcoin.
This is it. So it's like, it's very difficult to know. And we're trying to like navigate this. And so as I'm moving through this, I'm dealing with, I'm trying to communicate within the
Hmm.
space. I'm trying to signal to everyone around that I can, because it's important, because you have to have the back and forth signaling and communication. That's Bitcoin itself. As a
Yeah.
node, you have to be taking in and relaying, communicating with other nodes about what it is that you're building,
Hmm.
about what you think. Is this valid? Is this invalid? I think it's valid. Here you go. Oh, it's not
Right. And
invalid. I'm not sending that on to anybody else. That's actually Bitcoin itself. So you should expect that human beings involved in Bitcoin will be that the correct way for them to act is to do that.
participate in it.
That's the way you participate.
And participate, genuinely participate.
Well, or not, because again, well, when it's working right is when everybody's participating in a genuine way, but
Yeah.
there's no way to make that be the case.
Right.
You can't prevent a malicious actor from entering into the network. That's not how it works.
Mm-mm.
And that's not how we want it to work. Right? That's not how we want it to work. So I've been thinking about this. Like, this has been ongoing for me, but more and more, like, as I myself am learning how to deal within the framework of the meat space of it, it's like, in many ways I'm realizing, wow, this is very much a mirror of the technology itself. It's super interesting.
Hmm.
So what I wanted to talk about just in this first hour, and like we'll walk through it. And I mean, if things don't make sense, it's always nice to be able to bounce things off you, right? If things don't make
Cool.
sense to you, just be like, no, what is that? What's
Okay.
going on there? Explain that or whatever. I want to talk about like I want to talk about governance. So we had Joel Valenzuela on, and one of the things that I've caught from Dash Force News, and it was a great interview. Love the guy. Like, consider him a good friend and a colleague in Liberty for sure. That dude
Hmm.
walks the walk, man. He walks the walk of living the crypto lifestyle for sure. He is a straight up crypto savage. The definition of it. The dude lives on cryptocurrency. You can't be more crypto savage than that. And I when he sat down and explained to me, which is another great thing about being in New Hampshire, right? Like all these wonderful people. Bruce is based in New Hampshire too. When he sat down and really explained to me and answered my questions about Dash's governance model, I became intrigued. I became
Hmm.
intrigued because it's like, there are a lot of pros to this. There are some cons in the implementation. There always are, right? There are no solutions, only trade offs, as Thomas Sowell
Yep.
says. But I became intrigued. And I shared the fact that I was intrigued by this, and I shared what I had gained in terms of my insights about what the pros and the cons are of this particular, because it is a clone of Bitcoin, right? This sort of cousin of Bitcoin. To be
Yeah.
like, hey, here's something a cousin over here is doing that's interesting. I'm not saying do that necessarily, but hey, here are some things to think about. Here are some things that we know at least can be done on top of Bitcoin.
Hmm.
Not to say that they should be done, but hey, let's take a look. I caught hell. I caught it. He's gone all Dash. He's this is like the most weird criticism. Like I looked the other day when someone was laying out like Vin's getting. Somebody actually said the other day there was a tweet that said Vin is getting paid by Dash to promote Dash,
What?
and I went and I looked at my now, mind you. My full-time job is as the CTO and lead developer of Cointext,
Mm-hmm.
which is exclusively Bitcoin Cash. It takes all of its revenue in Bitcoin Cash. So all of my revenue from my company comes in Bitcoin Cash. All of it. We have zero revenue even in fiat. All of the revenue is in Bitcoin Cash and no other currency. We took our seed investment recently in all Bitcoin Cash. Like, as a matter of fact, in order to get our cash reserves, because as a business nowadays, you can't do all your business in BCH. So,
Right.
like to pay office rent, to pay server bills, you know what I'm saying? Things like
Mm-hmm.
that. So we have to have a bank account and we have to have some fiat in it. In order to do the fiat, we converted the Bitcoin Cash into fiat to go into the bank account. So
Damn.
it's so weird for someone to be like, Finn's getting paid by Dash. He's all in on Dash. He's a huge Dash supporter. So I went and I looked at my wallet. I have so little Dash ever that I only just keep it in a hot wallet on my phone.
Yeah.
$10.42.
Oh shit.
$10.42 worth of Dash. All in. All in.
Shit.
Very strange. Very strange.
Yeah, it's weird. That's weird shit.
I think that I wanted to talk about like what even, because I've been playing around with this in my head. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that one of the things that I notice about the Dash community is how unified they are without anybody demanding unity. Does that make sense?
Hmm.
Like,
Yeah.
so one of the main criticisms about me is when I point out that something is questionable or that an idea might not be good, or I point out, hey, there might be a bug in this idea.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly ideas coming from certain individuals who have a lot of
Right.
bad ideas, but also have a tight following that is really, really all about defending them no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
That what I'm often criticized for is trying to divide the community.
Hmm.
That, oh, what you're stirring up shit, you're trying to divide the community. And it's interesting that it's like, what is with this call for unity? Like, why is that necessary? Because like, I look at Dash and I see that there's no call for, and I asked Joel Valenzuela about that. I asked him about it, and early on, and he said, yeah, it's because because the governance model is there, it creates a forum for dispute resolution, for like competition, for all of that to take place in a way that at the end there's someone's clearly decided, and playing nice, playing by the rules, and being a good sport is part of how you win. Because
Hmm.
people submit proposals,
Yeah.
and then the proposals are voted on, but no one votes on proposals of people who act like assholes. Does that make sense? So I wanted to start this off before we start talking about governance, because I've often compared, and I've done it with Krista Rose and many other people, and I think that people should go and read the book by Darmaid McCullough called Christianity, the First 3,000 Years. Just even get the
Mm-hmm.
audiobook, listen to a little bit of it, because people don't understand how wild Christianity was at the very, very start. It was probably the first open source project. And
Huh. Interesting.
I've often compared Bitcoin to Christianity. Here's why I say that. It was definitely maybe not the first. It's hard to know with like the Indian, but that's more cultural, right? This was like a historical thing that we can trace. It doesn't go back
Yeah.
into the mythological time about. We know that Christianity was open source, right? As opposed to if you take the three great Western religions, you've got Judaism, Islam, Christianity. Judaism and Islam are clearly closed source. The most closed
Yeah.
source is Islam. by far.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's like, here's the Quran. It was dictated by one man, Muhammad. It's what he says. And literally, if Muhammad didn't say it, it's not part of this. Now, there have been things that have continued on after that, like the Hadith, which is sort of like, oh, Muhammad, something comes up, and they're like, well, Muhammad didn't say anything about that, but like, then they started asking like the people who knew him, and they were like, well, did he, his companions, they called him, did he say anything about this? And a companion might be like, you know what, there was a time we were sitting, we were having dinner, and he did. What did he say? He was like, blah, 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 blah. And then that gets added into the Hadith. And that's kind of like, okay, we can go to that for precedent in the future, right? But
Right.
the idea is like, the closed source is, the only contributor to this is Muhammad. He's the only contributor. He either contributed in things that were recorded formally, or he contributed in like the discussions that people had with him. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing goes for Judaism, right? You have the Torah. That's it. There's no more contributing to the Torah. You don't get to contribute. Like here, it's written, boom. Now you have like the Midrash and these other traditions of rabbis, but like those are sort of, they're interesting, but they're not like, that's not the religion.
Right.
Whereas in Christianity, in Orthodox Christianity, you have 4 different gospels. Gospel meaning good news or really good story. There are 4 stories, some of them contradicting each other. There's basically 4 implementations of even the story of Jesus that are different.
Yeah.
Right? They bring them together, but it's like, one, he's in a manger. Like, it's weird that they're like brought together, even the birth. One, he's in a manger. One, the 3 kings come. You know, like, one doesn't even tell a story of him like that. Now, there are things that are across all 4 gospels, and those are probably the things that are like, okay, this is actually legit Jesus. But it's the same thing as being like Bitcoin, Bitcoin Cash, Dash, and Ravencoin. It's like, well, they've all got proof of work. They've all got a blockchain. But then it's like these other things around it, right? So it's like, this is how decentralized open source projects work.
Interesting.
And you couldn't, like, anybody could write a Jesus story. Those are the 4 gospels that made it in, but there are hundreds of gospels. Those didn't make it into the canon. But anybody could write the story of Jesus. There was if you could write the story of Jesus and people would follow you based on that story, you're good. Paul wrote a whole thing about, he wasn't even there. Like he was like, I had a vision. I had a vision of him on the road. Never met the man. I had a vision of the risen Jesus, and he told me all of this, and now here's all this. And Paul is you didn't even have to be there. Like you didn't even have to know the dude. You could just like write, oh yeah, this is what Jesus would want you to do. This is what God wants. Jesus told me. That's open source, man. That's decentralized. They only put them together later, but the time before it was put together, you imagine what the environment of Christianity looked like before they were like, we have to, can we like grab all the things that are out there and put them into one, please? Because
I'm sure it was a total fucking mess.
Could you imagine?
Yeah.
That's why I say this book is, it's Darmaid McCullough, Christianity, the first 3,000 years. It's for anybody who's in Bitcoin, or anybody who just wants to know what the future of the decentralized world looks like. Like, we've been through it before. Western culture was built out of this. Like, this is, it's amazing. It's amazing, right? So, and look, Christianity is an operating system. Religions are operating systems, right? They're ways of operating human networks. That's what they are. You know, without the silicon. It's the, as tZero says, it's not silicon programming, it's carbon programming. Right? So On that note, there's a quote that we've gone over on the show, but I want to start here, and then I want us to kind of like walk through as we start thinking about governance, like how could this happen, like the beginning of a conversation, and I hope that it sparks some people's minds. Before we do that, want to let people know, of course, that Code from Go, August 15th is the next set of classes. Registration is open now, and it ends on August 10th, or if it fills up, which has happened in the past and could possibly happen this time. So I accept crypto and PayPal for this. It's 6 seminars. Each of them are 90 minutes long. This is for people who have absolutely zero coding knowledge. Zero. The expectation is that you know nothing. And every lesson, you can watch them either live or you can watch them on demand as many times as you want. But if it's live, you can participate in the chat, ask questions in the moment. And there's also little challenges to do in between the classes. All of these are designed in such a way that you just build on piece by piece by piece knowledge that you already had. All that's added on are little pieces, but by the end, it's efficiently done. By the end, you're able to write a real application. As a matter of fact, the application in this case is going out, having your program actually go out and find the price of Bitcoin, or you can do Bitcoin Cash, or you could do Ethereum, whatever cryptocurrency you want, to be able to call out onto the internet and to bring you back the current price in whatever currency is there. You're going to write a real application that does something very, very real, and you're going to do that within, it's only 3 weeks long, 2 classes per week. So August 15th is when that starts. You can go ahead and register now. Codefromgo.com. Also want to say it's summertime. Shirts at governyourself.com. Read 1984, Bitcoin, Ethereum, Litecoin, and blockchain. Bitcoin Cash, Simple Economics. There's the Dash shirt. No HODL. What do we got? Individual. Make Bitcoin Cash again. Anarchy Ball. And the ANCAP flag. Women's and men's. These are designed by our own Christian Rays. With love and care, and as you can see with the great Christian Rays design inside each and every one of them. Governyourself.com, GVRNURSLF.com. All right, Christian. So let's do this. I wanted to talk about a quote that we have said on this show, and of course it's one that's well known by libertarians. But the context of the quote, and not even the full quote, is very well known by most people, but most people will know the quote, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely, right? Most people know this. They don't know the context. They don't know who said it. So I want to talk a little bit about that, because while we are getting the state out of things and we're moving into a decentralized situation that is akin to, as we said, how Christianity was, I think we can often think that just by decentralizing, and this is something that the Bitcoin core people, I think, labor under, is that just by decentralizing, we get free. Or just by decentralizing, things are better and people are less corrupt. There are less corrupt individuals in the mix. We know that hasn't been true for Christianity. History just shows us that hasn't been true for Christianity. We shouldn't believe it's true for Bitcoin. There's a message. The person who made that quote, I'll actually say the author of that quote, because it's written in as part of a series of letters. His name is Lord Acton. He was a mid-19th century, that's 1800s, born into aristocracy in England. John Acton, first Baron of Acton. He's born into an aristocratic family, long aristocratic lineage. Important thing about this guy is he's a Roman Catholic. He's a Roman Catholic member of the British aristocracy, which at the time, not a lot of Roman Catholics, because the Britain is the Church of England. They had broken away from the Catholic Church. Anglican, Episcopalian, that's the Church of England. The Pope is the head of course, the Roman Catholic Church. The monarch of Britain, so in this case, the King or Queen of England, is the head of the Anglican Church. The religious head is the Bishop of Canterbury. So this guy is coming up as a Roman Catholic in a time when that matters, right? Mid 1800s. Your religious bent actually matters at this time. And he's a highly educated guy. He's wealthy. He actually gets turned away from Cambridge for university, has to go down to Munich to go to school. Highly religious, but he was a historian and actually acquired a really huge library that he was planning on using to write his magnum opus, which he never got around to writing, entitled The History of Liberty. So this guy was a student of liberty, and particularly the history of liberty. He was a big fan of the United States. He was actually in favor of the Confederacy. He became a member of Parliament and actually spoke in favor of the Confederacy during the Civil War because he believed that the federal government had gotten tyrannical, and he was a supporter of states' rights. Sounds like a lot of modern libertarians. So he was a supporter of the Confederacy on those grounds. The interesting part about him and where this quote comes from is, while he was British aristocracy, he was able to get away with a lot, and he actually became the editor of a Catholic magazine, a monthly newspaper in Britain for British Catholics, written in English, obviously. First it was called The Rambler, then it merged with another magazine that was called The Home and Foreign Review. Basically, if anybody's ever seen, these magazines are produced by the Catholic Church still to this day. If anybody's ever seen them, they're just like, talk to you about, what it is to be a good Catholic. But one of the things that they also have in it is sort of biographies of saints and historical figures. They do a lot of histories. This is what he was doing. That's why he was there. He was a history buff. What he became known for, and was actually, the magazine was censored several times by the church, was he was obsessed with reporting or recording and communicating history, sort of just the facts.
Yeah.
Like, he didn't necessarily think that it was correct to portray Catholics always as though they were infallible, or that these historical figures to omit their flaws or even the moral discretions that they had. He didn't think that it was right to assume that because someone was a Catholic, and perhaps if their enemy was of another religion, that their behavior was correct or moral. And more importantly, he didn't believe that because somebody had a particular position, that one should assume that they had good intentions.
Wow.
Right? This dude is at that time, to be stepping out against the Catholic Church like that in their own magazine as the editor.
Yeah, that's pretty.
But he got away with it because he was highly educated, super articulate, was able to explain his case, and was a member of the aristocracy. That never hurts. So it's like an SJW in today's parlance would say he was using his privilege correctly. Right? He was using his privilege to tear down the patriarchy in a way. So let's talk about this quote that from where we get power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. While this sort of controversy was going on in 1887, Lord Acton wrote a series of letters to a bishop in the Anglican Church who was sort of a correspondent of his. So this is not somebody in the Catholic Church. This is a friend of his, and he's kind of trying to explain why he's doing what he's doing, and trying to say the reasoning of why he believes what he's doing is right. And this is just a little segment, but it's the segment that has that important quote in it, and the full quote. He says, "I cannot accept your canon that we are to judge Pope and King unlike other men, with a favorable presumption that they did no wrong. If there is any presumption, it is the other way against holders of power, increasing as the power increases. Historic responsibility has to make up for the want of legal responsibility. Power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Great men are almost always bad men, even when they exercise influence and not authority. Still more when you superadd the tendency or the certainty of corruption by authority. There is no worse heresy than that the office sanctifies the holder of it." So you come back to us, Christian. I want to go through that line by line, because it's dense. It's dense what he's saying. I want to go sentence by sentence and deconstruct and decode what he's saying, because it's such an important thing for people to have front of mind, not just about the state, but he's also making a statement about religious figures, and he's very specific in it. And there's something in here for those of us who are involved in these decentralized movements as well. So let's go through the first thing. "I cannot accept your canon that we are to judge Pope and King alike, that we are to judge Pope and King unlike other men, with a favorable presumption that they did no wrong." So in this case, he's referring to the criticism of church leaders. That's why he's saying Pope and King. So Pope, the head of the Catholic Church; King, the head of the Anglican Church. He's saying, I can't accept this rule that you have, that kings and popes get to be judged unlike anybody else, with a favorable presumption that they did no wrong, where we start from a place to say, because they're the king, or because they're the pope, I'm going to presume that they haven't done anything wrong. Right? We don't do this. He's like, we don't do this with anybody else. Then he says, and this is important. So not only does he say, it would be one thing just to say that, to be like, we should judge popes and kings just like we judge other men. Right? He goes further than that. Like, it's actually important. He says, if there is any presumption, it's the other way against holders of power, increasing as the power increases. So he says, actually, no. The more power they have, we should actually increase our presumption that they're doing something wrong. Don't judge them like other men. Now, mind you, this is a man whose historical knowledge is unparalleled. He's drawing from back through history to say, what is the historical precedence about this? What does history tell us about how we should judge powerful people? He says, if there is any presumption, it is the other way against holders of power, increasing as power increases. Why? And this is where the power tends to corrupt comes in. This is the why. So somebody would be like, wait, you're saying I should actually assume first, like, guilty until proven innocent? I should assume first that popes and kings are actually bad actors? Worse actors than other men? Why?
Crazy.
Why should I assume that? And he says, power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So what's he saying there? He's saying power, and then he's going to go on to define what power is, right? But he says, power, when you have power, it has a tendency to corrupt you. So that is to say, someone who has power is more likely to be corrupt than someone who does not have power.
Yeah.
Right?
Correct.
Power itself adds a corrupting influence. That doesn't mean everybody who has power is corrupt. That's not his argument. This is an argument about what you should presume going forward, right? How you should be prejudiced going forward. Don't be egalitarian, he says. He says, look, one man has power, one man doesn't have power. It's more likely that the man who has power will be corrupt because power itself tends to corrupt. Then he says, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So what he's saying in that case is, if someone has absolute power, you are guaranteed they're corrupt. That's what that saying means. Absolute power, he says, corrupts absolutely, but we would say absolute power absolutely corrupts.
Yeah.
Guaranteed. It's no longer a tendency, it's guaranteed. If you have absolute power, you are guaranteed to be corrupt.
Well, here's the question that I always come with. Why?
Well, then he's going to go on. He's going to go on. He says, well, great men are almost always bad men. Now, he's not making a statement of why. He's making a statement of a reading of history.
Yeah.
Right? He's making a statement of, okay, we're going to make a presumption or a bet, which is very important to this conversation about presumptions and bets, because that's what being in a decentralized community is all about. That's what choosing a blockchain to support, to hold, to develop on, these are bets. These are bets about what type of people are going to come on, how much they're going to want this. These are all bets. And if you want to be someone who makes good bets, you're going to want to know history. Right? So it's like when odds makers make odds. What do? They look back at the stats. They look at the history.
Yeah.
You know, you've got two boxers going against each other. Okay, what's the record of each one of these boxers? Right? What's their age? When was the last time that they lost? You know, what types of fighters have they lost to? How do they do against guys who fight standard versus southpaws? Like, Are they a boxer? Are they a brawler? How do they do against boxers? How is their stamina? How many rounds do they usually go? Can they get a knockout after round 5? Like, all of these things, you look at history to make your bet. Because history is a great predictor of the future.
Yeah.
History is the only predictor of the future. So he's looking at history, right? He's not necessarily saying why yet, but we can get into why. We can explore why ourselves. He says, great men are almost always bad men. Okay? Then this is important. He says, even when they exercise influence and not authority. I'll stop right there. So what's he saying? Great men are almost always bad men. Even when they exercise influence and not authority. So he's being very specific here. He's like, even if you don't have the violence of the state, because what is power? What is power that he's talking about here? What he's clearly talking about is he's talking about the ability to get other people to do what you want them to do. That's power. The ability to manifest your will through the actions of other people in the world. To get people to follow what you want them to do. That is power. But he doesn't limit power to coercive power.
Influence.
Even persuasive power. Because you can have absolute persuasive power, particularly over a certain group of people, right? And this is something that religious leaders have. I mean, I don't know if you've ever listened to it, but have you ever listened to Jim Jones, the one at Guyana, the one where Drank the Kool-Aid comes from, the guy who took his followers out to Guyana, the People's Temple, They were from Oakland, and they, like, hundreds of them, the pictures are crazy because they've got aerial pictures of these dead bodies. Children, babies, they put poison into Kool-Aid, and he had everybody drink it, and he drank it himself. You can listen to the tape. He's sitting in a chair. Like, this was his last act to show God
That's some
himself how
crazy shit.
powerful he was. You can
Yeah.
just Google Jim Jones suicide tape. They made a tape of it. You can hear the whole thing. You can hear the people. There are some people in that audience who are like debating with him. I don't think that maybe we should do this. Like, I don't think we should. And he's just like, you don't understand, children. This is the only way. This is a revolutionary act. This is the only way for us to do this. You don't understand. And then suddenly the people are like, yeah, we're with you. They called him Father. We're with you, Father. You did everything for us. Now we'll give our lives for you. We'll do this. And then you hear the babies crying. Hush the babies, mothers. Hush the babies. Hush the babies. They're going
Jesus.
home to God. It's okay. There's no violence. There's no violence. But there's absolute influential power. Absolute power. And it's corrupting. What is more corrupt than getting mothers to give their children poison to satisfy your ego? What is more corrupt than that? And that's what and here he's warning about this. Here the student of history, the student of religion is warning great men are almost always bad men, even when they exercise influence and not authority. But still more when you super add the tendency or the certainty of corruption by authority. So what's he saying? When you have authority, the violence of the state is what he's referring to here. When you're able to have power that is the violence of the state as well, to wield a gun against individuals, then it's even more a chance. So he's basically laying out like a computer program almost.
Yeah, like different levels.
If then, if then, and then you can kind of score. Like, he's giving you a ranking of like, what are the chances? So obviously the most corrupt person is absolute authoritative power. That's the most. Right? And then the least would be like a little bit of only influential power. So able to persuade people a little bit, you're the least likely to be corrupt. Able to force people to do what you want with the power of the state, with the power of violence, you are guaranteed to be corrupt. Guaranteed. You can't not be corrupt. And then he ends it by saying, there is no worse heresy than that the office sanctifies the holder of it. There are a lot of people who have this problem, especially like you see like the cult of Trump, to where it's like, because Donald Trump is the president, whatever he says is morally correct. Whatever he does is morally correct because he's saying that's actually heresy. They were calling him a heretic. They were calling him a heretic for saying, just because he was the Pope doesn't mean that he isn't morally fallible. It doesn't mean he wasn't corrupt. Here's the history of him being corrupt. And they were like, heresy! He's the Pope! He's the Pope! He speaks to God! You can't say that! Heresy! And he comes back and says, no, there's no greater heresy than what you're saying. Because that flies in the face of reality. It flies in the face of history. It's an interesting place to start because we're going to remove the state, authoritative violence. But what you can't remove, and what I don't think anybody wants removed, is you can't remove an individual's ability to persuade
Corruption.
other people what to do. But the only protection that you have is this is my belief. And this is why like the governance within Dash is a kind of an interesting way of laying it out, is that like if you want to persuade the network to do something, you create a proposal, and then you're gonna the people who can back that proposal up, someone can always create a counter proposal against you and get that proposal funded instead of your proposal. And you don't get to keep getting your proposals funded if your proposals fail. Like if the first one fails, maybe you get the next one. Or if you just take the money or you don't do anything with it, maybe you get the next one. And then if that one doesn't happen, no one on that network will ever give you money again or even listen to you. So it incentivizes a lack of corruption. It incentivizes honesty.
Right.
And so I think that as we move forward, what will naturally emerge, there's been some, I had a great talk with the guy who was talking about some things about he's got this miners parliament idea, but while I don't necessarily agree with his prescription of things, I do agree with his description. It's the problem I've always had with Dash is that they've created this secondary layer of these master nodes, which are kind of like, which are a bureaucracy. Like I've expressed that publicly, that I think it tends to be a bureaucracy because these are kind of like bureaucrats. They're not really actors within the system. If it was minors voting, I think that it would make a lot more sense. Because then it's like, you speak with your vote.
Yeah.
You speak with your vote, and it's like, if you have an opinion, but yet you can't convince the other minors to vote the same way that you're voting, then you don't really have power. And if you don't have power, you can't be corrupt. And the only way to have power is to not be corrupt, because no one wants to listen to a corrupt individual.
Man.
It's this cool technical feedback loop, right? And it's like, these are the sorts of things that we could start thinking about. And I'm not saying today or tomorrow or next year, but I do think that blockchains that have governance like that really incentivize people to be good sports, that have rules, that have just enough rules to allow the game to continually be played by people who are good sports, but not so many rules that people can't understand it or it's prohibitive. Like, I'll give an example. I play beach volleyball. I love beach volleyball. Beach volleyball has very few rules, but it enables a very complex set of games. The rules are, you can only touch the ball one time in a row on your side of the net. It can only be by any individual. It can only be touched 3 times, so meaning it could go boom, and then another individual, and then it has to go over. You can't touch the net. You can't touch the other player on the other side of the net. And the ball has to land within the boundaries. If it lands outside of the boundaries, the point goes to the other team. Literally, that's it. But yet, there's things like with hand setting, and because you can't touch it twice, and like, well, how do you know if somebody went like this and they touched it twice or not? Like, there's all of these cool things can evolve, and layers of strategy and how you play, and it's the most watched game at the Summer Olympics, always. And also, interesting thing about having so few rules like that is it's a very egalitarian game. Men and women can play it together. Great women in the sport are just as good as great men in the sport. The top elite women can beat elite men's teams. They can beat them, which is rare in almost any other sport. You could imagine, like the NBA All-Star team and the women's All-Star team are like, that's a blowout. Close. That's like 100-point blowout. You know what I mean? So it's very interesting how a very few set of rules in an interesting environment can create an exciting and dynamic experience. And I think that it's something for people to start thinking about like, we're moving out of authoritative governance. We're moving into governance based on influence. And as we look, the chances are the least corrupt individuals, and likely then the individuals who actually have the best ideas, are going to be coming from these. We should be looking for ideas from these people on the fringes, man.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe the
Yeah, that's.
misfits, maybe the outcasts, maybe those who don't have so much power.
Mm-hmm.
Those are going to be the places where, where really the strength of this is going to come from. And really, that's who Satoshi was, too. That's who Satoshi was. Satoshi wasn't a powerful individual. He had a tough time convincing the people who liked his idea. If you go back and you read the Bitcoin Talk forums, he was being challenged constantly. Constantly. But he was patient. He described his idea. He sat and explained to people. Like, you read the emails he had back and forth with people like Hal Finney or even with Gavin Andreessen, answering their questions and their queries about what they had or what flaws or bugs that they thought that they saw.
Mm-hmm.
And then he left it open for others to change. He stepped away and said, now take it. Take it and run with it. Do what you're going to do and change it. And look at what that brought. Look at what that gave birth to.
Yeah, it's crazy.
So it's something to consider when an individual says that they have all the answers. When an individual says that the only way that anything in the space could succeed is if it happens on the terms that they themselves have decided upon.
Mm-hmm.
And that the ideas of other people are shit or worthless or will turn out to nothing. And especially if those individuals have the ability to influence others through their persuasive ability, and to get others, especially those who may not even understand what it is the individual is saying, to go along with the individual. You should think back to Lord Acton. The presumption should actually probably be in the other direction.
Absolutely. Wow.
So I think that's about,
that's great.
That's about an hour. As I said, Bruce Fenton, we're going to talk a lot more with him as well, which is awesome. We're going to talk about securitization, which is, again, about who owns what. How do we move authority off? And so much of this that's coming, like there's a great, John Fuchball and a whole bunch of other people put together this great thing that it looks like it's going to allow, I'm trying to get him on the show, but he's super, super low profile. I talk with him almost every day, but he's super low profile. We might be able to get tokens on, no, not we might be able to get. There are going to be, within the next 30 days, legitimate tokens. So that means new cryptocurrencies, just like the ones built on top of Ethereum, are going to be built on top of Bitcoin Cash. It's exciting. But that's gonna cool. It's a question of authority, and we're gonna talk about and power. We're gonna talk about that with Bruce Fenton when we come back from the break. Let's go to break. Thanks, dude.
The spirit of art. The spirit of technology. The spirit of individuality. Baby vodka. An ultra-premium spirit conceived by Armani. Handcrafted and distilled in Las Vegas by master distiller George Rotz. Each bottle, a celebration of the individual, custom engraved and hand-signed by the creators. Each element blending in harmony to create a beautiful experience beyond imagination. Baby vodka, the spirit of Vegas. Created by Armani. Tailored by Christian Rays. Available for purchase exclusively with cryptocurrency at babyvodka.com.
Welcome back to the Vin Armani Show. We are streaming live on YouTube at youtube.com/VinArmani. Also on Twitter and Periscope at VinArmani is my handle there. You can check out all of our audio archives at activistpost.com because we are members of the Activist Post podcast network. You can also check us out on dozens of terrestrial radio stations, satellite, and on the internet because we are on the Liberty Radio Network. That's at LRN.FM. So before we get into our interview here in the second hour, just want to talk to you all a little bit about countermarkets, trends and strategies for maximum freedom. It has been a wonderful year working on countermarkets, and we have so much planned for the new year. We're really, we've decided to step it up. It's been a successful project, dedicating more time and more effort to it. We'll probably be adding on more contributors, and of course the content has just been great all around. I look forward to writing in countermarkets all the time. We're actually approaching the time we've been around long enough that subscription renewals are going out. You can subscribe or you can renew. This is one of the few products that we do where we accept PayPal and credit cards, but of course you can also pay in about a dozen different types of crypto. Spend it, earn it. We're going to tell you and teach you how to earn it. If you want to know more, go to countermarkets.com. You can actually get your first issue for free. So if you have not received your first free issue, go ahead and do that. We can't wait to send it out to you. So without further ado, someone who knows a lot about helping himself and others make money, my guest today, Bruce Fenton. My guest today is Bruce Fenton. Bruce is an asset manager, blockchain enthusiast, and investor based in New Hampshire. He's the founder and CEO of both wealth management firm Atlantic Financial and Chainstone Labs, a financial technology company focused on the tokenization of securities and digital assets. He's the host of the Satoshi Roundtable, and he sits on the board of directors of Medici Ventures, tZero, and the Bitcoin Foundation. Most recently, he was instrumental in the creation of Ravencoin. Bruce Fenton, welcome to the Vin Armani Show.
How's it going? Great. Thanks for having me.
I am so glad to have you on. You are a guest that I've wanted to have for a long time because you are one of the most knowledgeable people and most experienced advocates for what is clearly the next phase in this whole blockchain and crypto revolution, and that is sort of tokenization, securities. We're seeing everybody on every chain. This is what's on everybody's mind. It's something you have a huge amount of experience with, and your thoughts on this are super valuable. So thank you for being here on the show. I guess if we could start out, as I like to do on the show, if we could get a little bit of your background of how you came into, well, where you were before you discovered Bitcoin, how you discovered Bitcoin, and what it is about the blockchain, that technology and cryptocurrency that you feel lends itself to securitization.
Sure, cool. Yeah, so I started in this business of investing quite a while ago. I was 19 years old. My mom was a stockbroker, and when I was a little kid, as she was raising me, I would come to the brokerage office starting when I was about 7 years old, and I got a job there when I was a teenager, and then I got my Series 7 when I was 19, became a broker at Morgan Stanley. It was Dean Witter at the time. And then I did that for basically 25 years. And that practice evolved. We were one of the first full service firms on the internet back in 1994, and we grew as the internet grew, and we served larger and larger clients all the way up to some of the biggest endowments and pensions and hedge funds in the world. And then I always focused on emerging markets and emerging tech. So originally the emerging market was China. I focused on that for a long time, and then focused on emerging technologies like the internet. And so when Bitcoin came along, I became very interested because it was an intersection of what I'm interested in about free market economics and technology and money and finance and all of these things combined. So that was a natural focus for me, and the rest is history. I've been in this space for about 5-6 years, done a lot of different things in it, and it's really exciting. So the convergence of tokenization of securities, which everybody has been talking about, is something that I've been interested in for a long time and been focused on for a few years. So I'm particularly interested in how everything is unfolding in that arena right now, as you mentioned.
Okay, so a lot of people who are checking this out, if I can get myself back on talking to you here. Yes, that's good. So a lot of people who are checking out the show probably do not have, because most people don't have, a broad background with financial instruments besides money. Besides cash, right? Or whatever's in their bank account. And so people hear the word securities, and I think for many people who have no experience with it, even the word itself, with our understanding of what the word security means in day-to-day use, doesn't really resonate with them or explain very much to them. So if we could, before we start talking about this, because it is very important, and I think once people get it and sort of get the jargon, I think a lot of this becomes very clear of why this is so important and why people should care. Can you explain, just in basic terms, what are securities? What is a security?
To me, that's a really great question, and I've thought about that for a long time, especially over the last few years. In the United States, it's defined by the 1933 Act, the Securities Act of 1933, which is a big, long thing, which basically covers everything. If you look at that act, it says, debt, debenture, obligation, on and on. It's about 20, 30 different terms in a big, fat paragraph. So basically, it kind of covers everything. And for outside the law, kind of the definition is you as a voluntarist would know that we have to have our own definition of words first.
That's right.
And then we can worry about what the legal systems decide they want to define things, and we may or may not agree with that. But at its real root, I would say a security is basically an agreement. That's really all it is. It's agreement between parties that says if one party does X, you're going to get something in return. And one simple and typical example of that is one form of security that's very popular is stock. So with stock, you say, okay, Vin is going to create Vin's sandwich shop. I'm going to invest $1,000 and I get 5% of that company. Mm-hmm. And then Vin and I are making an agreement, or Vin's entity and I are making an agreement that I'm going to get percentage of whatever that business is owned. And if that pizza shop does some amazing thing, then I'm going to benefit. If it fails, then I share in that risk. So that's basically what a security is. And it doesn't have to be equity in a business. It could be any kind of thing. A lot of securities are all kinds of very, very complex agreements based on a whole bunch of different things that may or may not happen. But that's basically what it is. It's an agreement. And what you can do with this technology is a blockchain isn't really good at recognizing agreements. However, these agreements exist in the world anyway, whether you're voluntarist and they are just agreements between you and other parties, or whether you're in the United States and there are agreements that are governed by US law or they're governed by some other law. It doesn't really matter whether it's under a legal jurisdiction or not. What matters is that people and parties in those can reference a blockchain. So you can take say U.S. securities law, and you can reference something that happens on a chain, just like you can reference the weather. Mm-hmm. And you could say, okay, if I hold this specific address, then that represents that 10% of Vin's pizza shop that I bought. And if you and I have an agreement, and whether we choose to use New Hampshire law or Delaware law or US law or China law, or we just decide to say, hey, we're going to be a couple of anarchists and do our own agreement, whatever it is, we have an agreement that then references something else. And we have whatever mechanisms we would have in the regular world to resolve that. If we have a difference of opinion or something, then that would either go to court or whatever we've agreed on ahead of time. But the cool thing about this is that we can reference something on a blockchain to represent ownership in a security. And that's a big deal, because then I can take that pizza shares and I can move it on my phone, just like I can move Bitcoin to somebody else. And that creates more liquidity, which is really, really huge in capital markets.
So this is, I think, important. And I mean, it seems to me that there are two ideas that are being conflated right now in this discussion. And I maybe even conflated them in my intro with you. And that is tokens, and maybe there's three: tokens, securities, and smart contracts, right? Because, as you said, every security is fundamentally a contract. It's an agreement, so it's fundamentally a contract. So it has a contract aspect. Since it sits on the blockchain, and since, as you say, we're referencing it, it's clearly a token. It's a representation of something. And yet, these are really three separate concepts, and I'm hoping that if we could dig into how they're different. So, for instance, I see a lot of the blockchain tech conferences and talk being about types of tokens that maybe aren't contracts, titles to title of ownership of a piece of property, medical records is one that I keep on seeing. These are contracts, and then I also see smart contracts that have nothing really to do with securities per se, contracts that are just executing code of one kind or another to run an application. How do we make this separation, or how do you make the separation for people so that they can understand specifically what separates a security from just a token or a smart contract? And also, how do you rank the value to us overall, or where should we be prioritizing these concepts and these ideas in terms of development?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Hold on, let me just get my headset. I'm getting some feedback here. So that's a great concept. Or a great question, because there's a lot of confusion about exactly what is a security. Are all tokens securities? Are they all not securities? How does it change? And we've been researching this for a few years, way before anybody else was talking about it. We were the very first to talk to regulators, and we're sort of ahead on this. And because of my background, having been governed by these regulations for 27 years, I sort of have a sixth sense about how these things might end up going. And it is really important to separate it. So there was all this discussion, and it's starting to get clarity. And a lot of people, you see people talking about saying, well, there's not regulatory clarity. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't understand what the SEC is going to do about securities, whatever. I don't think that's the case. I think it's very, very clear. And I think all their comments have been very consistent, exactly what I would have predicted a few years ago. And that is basically that you have, at least in the United States, we'll talk about U.S. law because that is so important, because it's such a huge market, and it also influences a lot of the rest of the world, and it's such a center for companies like Coinbase and everything else who are based here. So under U.S. law, basically, they're going to consider things a security if they fall under that definition. They don't really care whether it's a token or a key or you could have an open dime or a hardware wallet or any number of other things that you could call a security. The government is going to look at that big broad definition, which they've already said in Supreme Court decisions it should be interpreted very broadly. And those things that are agreements are securities, whether they have a token or not. And if they're not a security, it also doesn't matter if they have a token. Adding a token to something doesn't make it a security, because you're absolutely right. There are things like commodities, collectibles. If you have a game and you have Spells of Genesis or something like that, those cards are not securities. If you invest in the parent corporation, that might be a security, but Magic cards, Pokemon cards, comic books, these things may go up and down in value. There's a lot of misconceptions about it. People think that if something has a dividend, or it goes up or down in value, or if it's speculated, or if somebody mentions it in a certain way, makes it a security. That's usually not the case. You got to go by the definition in the 33 Act. So yeah, it's really important to differentiate that and think about these different concepts. So a security is basically an agreement. Anywhere in the world, it's an agreement. And then based on what jurisdiction you are in or choose to use, it gets a little more specific, such as in the United States, where it is very, very specific about kind of any type of agreement dealing with money, where you're looking at profiting from somebody else's work. That's generally considered a security. And then you have, like you said, you have tokens, which could be, anybody can issue a token. It's pretty easy to issue a token. You can issue it on Ethereum, now Bitcoin, you could Ravencoin pretty soon, EOS, ADA, a lot of different platforms are going to enable you to issue a token. And then the issuer decides what principles what properties that token has. So you can issue the Vin Pizza Shop token and say, okay, I'm issuing 10 tokens, Bruce gets one, each token represents 10%. I'm going to keep 90, Bruce gets one, 10%, $1,000, whatever. But you as issuer, you could also say, I'm going to issue Vin's collectible token, and each one entitles you to one poetry reading by Vin. That's not a security. and you could issue 1 million of those. You could you could do you could say this token is going to represent the right to do something, and you have a separate legal right, or it may represent no legal right. It might just be this is the whatever widget token, and I'm only issuing 97 of them, and they're really rare, and people want to collect them, whatever. Mm-hmm. You as token issuer can have any properties you have. You can have a separate legal agreement that says, I'm going to give you Google could issue a token that says it's worth 50% of the company. All it would take is a board resolution. It's a big board resolution, right. But the point is one token could be worth billions and billions of dollars if somebody, puts that on there in the legal world, and then comes what you said about smart contracts, which is a whole other thing where you can basically program these kind of agreements and tokens to interact with each other in pretty exciting ways.
So I want to talk about this programmable aspect because there was, if I can get myself back on, I'm having a hell of a time. There I am. There was a great debate this last week, or at least it was put up on YouTube this last week, that Reason Magazine put up on their YouTube between Eric Voorhees and Peter Schiff. Right. I don't know if you checked it out. It's great. But one of the things, and Voorhees said it in that debate, but Andreas Antonopoulos has brought it up. You've brought it up many times in your discussions. One of the things that separates Bitcoin from everything else and that separates sort of blockchain technology from everything else is the programmability that it gives to financial instruments. I think that as we move forward on this, it seems that there are two camps that are forming as it relates to the execution of these agreements that are securities. There's one camp, the sort of Vitalik Ethereum camp, who believes, the future of this whole thing is for sure executing these things as smart contracts away from any third party, that everything is handled, code is law, it's all on the chain, that's the way to go. You, having had a lot of experience in dealing with the state on these matters, have, at least as I've interpreted it, taken a little bit of a different position on how the best way to roll this out is. When it comes to how these things get executed and what role smart contracts will play, if any. Can you talk about your thoughts on that matter of whether execution should be on-chain or off-chain of these agreements?
Well, you can have it be a smart contract and also have it be off-chain. I think smart contracts are really interesting, and it creates entire new ways. What I'm really interested in, there's going to be entirely new ways of how people interact and how people do these arrangements. Securities right now, as I mentioned, is very broad. I used a simple example of an equity in a stock, which is basically, a stock is just a piece of a business. If you own a share of Google, you own a tiny, tiny piece of Google. And if Google does well, you do well. If it doesn't, you don't. So, but securities can be much more complex than that, and typically it's been a hassle of paperwork and things like that. So things like co-ops. There's a lot of co-ops that are very popular and well known. Welch's Grape Juice, Land O'Lakes, REI. There's a whole mess of them in the UK. Co-ops are not corporations like Microsoft or Google. They share among the owners, and those kind of structures, I think, are going to be a lot more common, and you can have a smart contract that makes it easier for people to share value and share risk. And that's really what these agreements are all about. That's what securities are about in general. It's just a way to share risk, distribute risk. If a business owner wants to de-risk themselves or have some liquidity or something like that, that's typically what securities are for. So I think smart contracts will be a really important part about that. I like the idea of code being law. Ideally, if we could have everything be done sort of technologically rather than regulatorily, that would be great. The reality is that because the laws, at least in the United States, are so broad and so strict, and I'm an anarchist, certainly at least a libertarian or minarchist, so I'm not a fan of any of these regulations. I don't think they should exist at all, but I've been governed by them for 27 years. So far, I haven't had a single complaint, don't intend to have a problem with them. They're very, very serious regulations. If somebody uses drugs or wants to traffic in drugs, they may be, I would support them morally. I'd say go ahead, do that, but I wouldn't recommend somebody going down the street with 10 pounds of heroin.
Right.
No matter how much of an activist you are, you don't want to go to jail. Or, well, some people do, and my heart goes out to them. That's very brave. But personally, I would never violate these regulations. So you really have to, at least in the U.S., at least in my position, you really kind of have to follow these regulations. And they're really strict and they're really serious. And there's a lot of people that have just kind of said, oh yeah, they kind of go around it or something. These are federal rules. It's federal prison. It's federal enforcement. They're very, very, very serious. And they've been around forever. 1933 is when the 33 Act that defined what a security is came out. So 85 years, the 33 Act, the 34 Act, the 40 Act, these things have been around for a long, long, long time. They're not going to change in 2018 or 19. So yeah, you just basically have to comply with the law. They're not that bad, really. Being a minarchist, I find the SEC to be the least authoritarian of most of these agencies. A lot of business people, they deal with business people all day. A lot of Wall Street are kind of cowboy type people. They push back a lot, and a lot of them have billions of dollars. So they're not the type to get pushed around by regulators like some of these other industries. Regulators push Wall Street. Wall Street pushes right back. So they're actually pretty good as far as regulators go. It'd be great if we didn't have them at all, but the rules aren't that hard to comply with compared to some other industries. So I think that you're going to have to kind of comply with the law. But yeah, ideally, if you could put everything into a smart contract form, so it all happens technologically without any real parties or people or corporations or entities, you might be able to do it and not even have it be a security. And you can certainly do it in a way that makes it so that people can share and share risk and share value in a way that you couldn't do before. So that's pretty exciting.
So I want to talk a little bit about Ravencoin, and there's been, I think it's very misunderstood for a lot of the same reasons that we're talking about. People just completely misunderstand what it is that securities are in the first place, what the laws are. I mean, this is something that is clearly, there's kind of a curse of knowledge about this that I'm sure that you have. You take some things for granted that you just know, and that it's kind of secret knowledge. You've got an elite level of knowledge about this particular subject matter. Can you talk to us a little bit about what Ravencoin is, how it started out, what problem it's trying to solve? And then I always have a tough time. What do you call yourself? When I say the X of Ravencoin, like what do you consider?
I usually say community member. I think
okay.
Good coins are all about community, and I'm a community member of the Bitcoin community. I'm a member. I get a lot of flack for this. You and I talked about this in person. I don't view this as I think it's a loser mentality to view this as win or lose. We can all win. I invested in the crowd sale of Ethereum, EOS, ADA. I've been super, super active in Bitcoin. I own more Bitcoin than everything else I own combined. Very active in Ravencoin. I think that having it's fine to have a maximalist attitude. I think and hope that Bitcoin will be the one chain to rule them all. I hope that it becomes the global reserve currency. But even if I was 90% sure of that, or even if I was 95% sure of that, only a fool bets 100% that they're 100% right. Even if you're very, very confident, you should have a little bit to hedge, because even if you're basing that assuming that Bitcoin's the best coin, the best doesn't always win. Betamax versus VHS, the Tucker versus GM and Ford. The best product doesn't always win. So you'd be crazy to bet 100%, to say I am 100% certain that I'm right, that it will only be Bitcoin, and I'm 100% certain that I'm correct, and I'm not going to hedge it in any way. As a portfolio manager, I think that would be irresponsible. So I invest in a lot of these things, and I'm excited about a lot of them. So Ravencoin is a cool project. It's a fork of Bitcoin that, and the reason it was started is basically there's this huge use case of tokenization, which everybody's talking about. Ethereum is kind of the go-to player in this right now. But as huge as this perhaps multi-trillion-dollar use cases, there's not a lot of chains that really just focus on just tokens. A lot of them are working on smart contracts and delegated proof of stake and all kinds of complex things. Bitcoin is working on being either global cash or global transaction network, or both, depending on what your opinion is. But I thought it would be useful to say, okay, let's see what we could do with Bitcoin, and try and take it out for a spin and experiment with the code a little bit. And that's what the developers are doing. They're kind of going out there and using some of the things from Counterparty and Mastercoin, some of these capabilities that Bitcoin could have, making them part of the native protocol, and then using the significant security and scalability and all the other huge advantages of Bitcoin. So it's experimental, but the cool thing is that it will be a chain that should be very, very secure, because Bitcoin is very secure. So if there's a problem with the code, that's a bigger fish to fry, because that would mean there's a problem with Bitcoin code, which is the most reviewed piece of code in the world. But it will be able to issue assets that are recognized native on chain. So that's kind of neat. And those tokens can be anything. So just like I said before, the issuer of a token, when the Ravencoin protocol is live, now the coin is live, this functionality is not live. So the coin is mineable ever since January 3rd. It was announced in October, but you can mine it, and you can move them around on your wallets and things like that, and you can get these coins. There's a limited supply. It's same schedule as Bitcoin, just everything multiplied by 1,000. So it's 21 billion coins, and it's a 1 minute block time. So everything's adjusted for that. But you can once the capabilities come out sort of at the end of the month in the test net, and then eventually live, you'll be able to use at the native level, just like you can move Bitcoin around, and there's data that's in the opt return codes. That data will say that certain tokens are created and issued. So you, as a user of the Ravencoin network, will be able to issue any number of tokens with any name or properties you want. So you could issue 1,000 New Hampshire coins, or 1,000,000 Armani coins, or whatever you choose, and those can have whatever properties you want. You could say this represents a business, this represents nothing, this represents a joke. It represents. You could have a token that issues 1,000,000 tokens an hour and has no value, right. Or Google could issue one that says, this is a super token, and if you have this one token, you own 10% of our company. It could be whatever the issuer decides. But the goal of the protocol, and the protocol won't know whether you're Google or Armani or Bruce Fenton. What the protocol will know is that there's these things out here that are recognized, just like your Bitcoin can recognize Bitcoin. So I think that's cool, and I think it'll be interesting to see what happens with it. And my belief is that it's useful to have a chain that's totally focused on this use case. Mm-hmm. I do certainly sympathize with the idea that there might just be one chain that rules everything, but I think the Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash debate has shown us that the world's a big place. There's different people that just aren't going to agree. It doesn't mean one is right or wrong, but people have different preferences. Some people like silver, some people like gold, some people like Litecoin, some people like Bitcoin. I don't think you're going to just have the whole world always agree on. There's always going to be some, even if it's a small minority, and we're talking about $1 trillion market, a small minority could be hundreds of billions of dollars, but you can have some small minority that has use case specific chains or something. So that's sort of my overall philosophy on chains in general. And that's a little bit of a description about what Ravencoin specifically does, which I think is a cool project. Oh, and by the way, the important to note, it was done with no ICO, no pre-mine, no sale of any kind. There was no fundraising. It's just code in the classic cypherpunk manifesto style. It was announced on the anniversary of Bitcoin, and then it was binaries released on the anniversary of Bitcoin, and it was just code that was published, and it's out there. And by the way, that's useful to know also. There's absolutely no question that Ravencoin is not a security based on my understanding of securities laws, which I think is decent, because all it is code. And that's something I would certainly argue in court, just like I would argue Bitcoin is not a security. Because if you look at Bitcoin or Litecoin or Ravencoin or Monero, real true cypherpunk open source issued projects, all it is somebody taking an idea and a developer writing that idea down, expressing it in code, and then publishing it. And that has got to be a free act that humans can do, regardless of whether somebody says there's some kind of law or something like that. That is not a security, because you're just publishing something. And if somebody else chooses to run that on their computer and they get these crazy widgets called Bitcoin, and they choose to ascribe value to them, then that's their deal. That's not something that the person writing the code, that's not something Satoshi did. So that's important to note. Those, you know, it didn't surprise me that the SEC said Bitcoin is not a security. Ethereum is a little different story. I'm glad that they said it wasn't a security. But in the case of Bitcoin, Litecoin, and Ravencoin and others like that, they're definitely not securities, because all you're doing is publishing code, and there's no money exchanged.
I want to go off on a little bit of a tangent here, because it has been a topic that has come up in the, as you know, I'm pretty well involved in the Bitcoin Cash community, and what that means is being ready to go to the mat and deal with a lot of BS. I know you catch it from a lot of the core trolls. You as of yet have escaped the particular flavor of troll that exists in Bitcoin Cash. So count yourself lucky. I've been thinking a lot about this lately, and the point that you bring up about the nature of whether it's experimentation, whether it's settling a conflict over ideas. It seems to me that the way that this whole thing started, the idea, as you say, the cypherpunk idea, I mean, it says it right in the cypherpunk manifesto, like cypherpunks write code.
Yes.
And that if we don't get privacy, no one's going to get it, so we're going to write the code ourselves. And I think that there's something to be said there in terms of like conflict resolution. That it's like, instead of this lobbying to try to get people who are already doing something to alter course, and how pathological that turns, to just simply write the code. But then what I wanted to ask you about is, I think that's the right way. And I think most logical people would look at it and be like, well, yeah, I don't understand. This person wrote code. Other people said, yeah, I like it. I'll take that as a preference. They didn't coerce anyone. They didn't try to hurt anyone. They just said, hey, I have a different idea. Here I go. But yet you've been attacked for participating in that peaceful behavior. I'm interested to hear your thoughts, what this experience has taught you about what the community is, what the culture is, because you have to have some thoughts on this thing.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, I mean, there's a few things to unpack. I mean, as far as conflict resolution, I love that line. It is my favorite line in the Cypherpunk Manifesto. Just, you write code. Just write code and you put it out there. Like, you don't like it? Okay, maybe you don't like my poem. Maybe, I've been trying to be some sort of artist forever, and I write these little cartoons. I'm just not a good artist. They're really, really basic little cartoons. I mean, I should be like some of these people I'm fans of by now, all the art that I'm a fan of. It's just not my skill. But if somebody writes code, and whether it's good or bad, like, what do you care? You just don't run it on your machine if you don't like it. I think there's a lot of people with sort of a little bit of a negative mentality in this space. And there's a bit of an unhealthy thing that's come with some of this maximalist idea, where it's sort of like, let's make a name for ourselves and go on Twitter and belittle other people and make ourselves look good and talk about how stupid everybody is or something. I think that's misguided. It's not a great idea, because it still is very early. You don't know what's going to happen in this crazy space. But at the end of the day, it comes down to, what code do you like? I like the Bitcoin code. I think that's good software. It hasn't had any problems. I've joked with the developers before. I say, hey, thanks for the free software. No bugs, no viruses, looks good, works as planned. The license says, basically, if you ever read the Bitcoin license or any of these licenses on most of these coins, it says basically take it or leave it. Yeah. There's no promises. There's no warranties. If you want to run it, run it. If it generates these magical widgets called Bitcoin or Litecoin, then you can use them and say they're valuable or not valuable. That's completely free market. So and also the whole idea about open source is that it's supposed to be experimented with. It's supposed to be taken out for a spin. That's what Satoshi did. A lot of people have become kind of bag holders, and they never had any money before in their life, and now they have a little bit of Bitcoin, and they're just kind of holding on with nervousness, and you've lost a little bit of that excitement that we had 5 years ago, when nobody really cared as much about the money parts of it, or at least they weren't so so focused on that. They were more like, wow, what can this do? How can this work? And I remember when Litecoin came out, there was some people who said, oh, this is a waste because he's taken away developers. There's only a limited number of developers. We only have like 4 developers working full-time on Bitcoin. Right. If Charlie does this, he's not working on Bitcoin, and 2 or 3 of them might follow. You don't hear that concern as much anymore. but the overall idea, even when Ethereum was released, people thought it might fail, but it was more of a positive thing. Like, yeah, sure, this is cool code. Go out and try it, mess around with it, and that's what open source is meant for. So I think that's really healthy if people go and try things, and it's a different matter if they're trying to raise a bunch of money. Then that does have a different metric to it. But even within that, there is a lot of scams. But I think kind of the criticism in this space has jumped the shark a little bit. I was reading about, I just moved to New Hampshire not long ago, as you know, and I've been trying to brush up on state history, which is very fascinating. Yeah. But the fur trade here, a few hundred years ago, 300-400 years ago, was huge. Yeah. It was like the thing for the whole world. It was like the asset management business or the automobile industry or the computer industry. I mean, it was the thing. Fur was everything. Where you made rivers and how you made boats and how people made houses and villages, all about the fur trade. So, was that a scam? Were they all wrong? Who cares about fur? Fur's stupid. I don't want a fur coat. They're out of style. Okay, well, that's just the way the world works. Economy works. If people want to buy something, if they want to buy a token or something like that, things go up and down. It doesn't need to be a contentious thing where people get angry and say, I don't like because this guy's running Bitcoin Cash code instead of Bitcoin code. I think that's going to hurt me. Those attitudes come from a place of lack and a little bit of negativity, and I think are frankly kind of sometimes sort of a loser thinking mentality. Like if I like Bitcoin and Vin likes Bitcoin Cash and his thing does well, it's going to hurt me. Well, that's not the case, because if this works, you'll all do well, or maybe somebody will do well, somebody won't. But the rising tide is good for everybody. So I like to look at it as I want Ethereum to do well. I want EOS to do well. I want ADA, Bitcoin Cash to do well. I want everything to do well, and even those projects which are and there's certainly many, maybe 90%, 95% that are probably going to fail. But even from those, we can learn, and maybe some of those have some good code that comes out of it. And so I have more of a chill attitude about this whole kind of thing. And I think that's the way science should be. Just sort of look at it, kick some tires, see what can work, try it out.
I like that. I'm of the same mind on that point. So now getting back to securities, thank you for that, by the way. I think people need to hear that, especially in the particular community, the particular fork that I'm in. People need to hear outsiders being rational. Getting back to securities, clearly within the next couple of years, businesses, I mean, we are already talking about it at Cointext in terms of for our Series A, both with our VC, and within our company. I think the other two founders are very interested in the idea of like, hey, maybe when we come around to, even our lawyers too, when we come around to issue these stocks for the Series A, like maybe we should think about doing this on the blockchain. Maybe this makes sense. For those companies that I know clearly we're not alone, and certainly everybody in the space, it's a discussion that at least they're having with the founders or the board of director, at least a perfunctory discussion about it. As we begin to be these first adopters and move forward, what are the things that you think we should be paying attention to, whether it's technologically, regulatorily, that can help us to make a decision about, one, whether or not this is the right move to make now, and two, if it is the right move, which is the best path to take to avoid the maximum amount of pitfalls?
That's a great question. I think you are wise to look at that. I would recommend anybody in the startup space or anybody with any kind of fundraising or security that they're thinking about offering, if you're doing it now, now's a great time as you're working with your lawyers. We're doing something right now where I'm planning for the future. I want to future-proof it to make it so it can be easy to make it into a token security. And early on, it may just be a few lines that you add to your original documents. Later on, it might be more expensive or complex. But if you put something early in the early stages that say, something like, this is completely an example, obviously you'd go to a lawyer, right, but something like, management of the company by board resolution can convert common stock into tokens which represent common stock, something like that. And it shouldn't be, it's common enough now, and with the Delaware laws and a few other things, it's common enough now that most lawyers with a decent understanding can do this not too complex, because 99% of what they're doing is regular securities law that any securities attorney should know. You're just adding a little thing and saying, okay, by the way, my securities, I have this actually I leave it on my desk. It's when I created a security with just a piece of paper. This is a legal security
Really?
Because it's signed by me. Sure. If anything can be a security, this open dime can be a security too. Because a security under the 33 Act is whatever, basically whatever you say. It's pretty easy to become a security. It's harder to avoid being a security.
Right,
if I want to say, hey, I want to give you 10% of Atlantic Financial, I don't want that to be considered a security. That's really, really, really hard. And in some cases, it's basically impossible under U.S. law. But if you go the other way and say, I do want to be subject to securities laws, it's like going through the TSA line and they say, no, we don't need to check your bag. And you say, no, I want you to check my bag. Oh, they'll be like, okay. So that's the way the laws are. Most people are trying to avoid being a security. But if you say, yeah, we're a security, then you can use that whatever form that want. It could be a piece of paper or a share token or an open dime or a token on a blockchain. So I think it's good to think about that. Now, one of the big questions is what chain you're on, because it'd be a real shame if you had a successful business, everything went well, but then there was a problem out of your control that the chain had that caused you to get hacked or things lost or the whole chain melted down or whatever. So you do have to watch things like, in the case of Ethereum, there's scaling, although there's a lot of brain power behind Ethereum trying to fix these things, and it's unlikely that, nobody's just going to let the whole network die. Bitcoin is a very strong chain, so you want to look at those kind of things very carefully. And that's one reason, although I've been talking about this for a long time, I haven't issued any tokens. I haven't issued any securities tokens. I plan to be a large securities issuer of securities tokens, but partly it's a matter of finding the right chain. And also from a trading standpoint, there isn't really a lot of ways to trade these right now. An exchange can't trade a security unless they have a securities license. And so far, kind of none of them that are up and running have that. tZero, which I'm on the board of, has a whole bunch of licenses. Coinbase just acquired some, but none of them are fully operational, as in right this minute I can take a security token and trade it for Bitcoin. Not at least not any of the mainstream sort of exchanges. So yeah, those are some of the things you can think about for the future as you're planning. But it's a good idea to plan for this, because I think everything's going to be tokenized. I think that the whole world's going to be tokenized. You're going to have trillions of dollars, small businesses, large businesses, all kinds of things other than businesses, and it will all be tokenized.
So, as you said, you moved to New Hampshire recently, as did I, and we got a chance to catch up a little ways back, and I'm sure that we'll be doing it plenty in the future. So,
sure.
I'm glad to have you here. I think your presence is going to make a huge difference in terms of bringing the businesses here that I think should be here as this space evolves. In October is going to be, is that right, the second year of a conference that you've organized?
Yep.
That where a lot of these ideas are going to be discussed. I think it's probably, in terms of bang for the buck, probably the best conference on this topic, just because it's going to be intimate enough that you're going to get a chance to talk to some extreme experts in an environment in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, where you can actually walk around and spend your days buying beer and lunch and other things actually with your Bitcoin or Bitcoin Cash or Dash or Litecoin. Talk to us a little bit about this, about your conference, what we can expect there, and your plans for this thing moving forward.
Yeah, it's going to be cool. I really love New Hampshire. I signed the Free State Pledge about 4 years ago, and then finally made the move about 6 months ago. Our office is on the Seacoast area, which is really cool. It's right kind of on the border of Massachusetts. So it's only an hour to Boston. If you want the international flights, you could go to Manchester. If you want a domestic flights, even closer. As you know, my son just had brain surgery. They have absolute world-class hospital at Dartmouth. It's just as good as Mass General. We've been to Mass General. I think it's actually better. And believe me, when you have your son having brain surgery, you take it really seriously. We would not have brought him there if we didn't think it was if I thought there was a hospital in China or Mayo Clinic, we would have flown him there in a second. But New Hampshire has outstanding medical care, outstanding. Oh, and he's great, by the way. If anybody isn't following,
I'm
Twitter,
glad. I'm glad.
Thank God.
So glad.
yeah, it's got great medical care, great schools, great environment. A lot of it was chosen by the Free State Project as because it was already kind of one of the freest states. As you know, a lot less government coming from Massachusetts, which is one of the most regulated states, probably one of the worst three, with New Hampshire, with New York and California. New Hampshire is probably one of the three best. So going from one of the worst to one of the best was a huge shock, just noticing all of the little different things, how easy it is to enroll kids in school, how few documents you need to set up your business and do things. It's just easier. And there's a great, huge Liberty community. There's thousands of people who've already made the move, and there's thousands more who've joined. And there's different kinds. There's kind of militant anarchists who want to fight. Then there's a whole big, huge group that's really quiet that just kind of wants to be left alone. They just want to mind their own business and do their own thing. They don't really get into the political type of stuff. They don't give speeches or do blogs. They just kind of cool people that are the kind of people you can rely on, that are nice to hang around on. So we love it up here. It's got a real strong Liberty community, and there's a lot of businesses moving. There's some people, there's some I don't know if he wants to say, but one of the most prominent people in the space is here. You know, a billionaire kind of, you know, crypto guru. There's several of them. There's a whole bunch of people with roots or connections here. Roger Ver, I think, signed the pledge at one point. Eric Voorhees lived here.
Yes.
So this conference will be great. So we've got Jonathan Johnson from Medici, Jason King, everybody knows, Paul Snow from Factum, Sean Owen, Ann Connolly, Caitlin Long, Jeffrey Tucker, Stan Miroshik from what is his company called? I don't want to get his company name wrong, but Stan's one of the top sort of investment bankers in the space. Patrick Byrne is going to speak. Hadley Stern from Fidelity, Darren Tapp from Dash, Paige Freeman. Who else? I think that's it. So it should be fun, and it's kind of like an old school conference feel. It's definitely not like Consensus. It's way smaller. Good group of people. It's kind of like what a conference was like a few years ago, and it'll be a fun time, kind of a community feel. We're really working on trying to build this and make it you know, a really strong community. We're going to be doing a lot of small events. I'm going to be doing a lot of like mini roundtable style events. We've got a good location in New Hampshire that we can do that. You know, private settings, you know, away from people in a farm or the woods or something like that. There's some cool stuff like that we're going to do. So yeah, I think it's, if you've ever been thinking about the Free State Project, or you're interested in Bitcoin, you just want to see some good speakers, they're not in a crowd of 10,000 people, come on up.
So this is the name is the new, what is it? Free State. It's changed now.
Free State Blockchain Digital Efforts Conference, and if you go to the website, it's Blockchain New Hampshire.
Blockchain.
So if you just go Free State Blockchain, it'll show up on Google.
There we go. I will have the link to that in the show notes for everybody to check out. I advise people to check it out. I will definitely be there hanging out. Who knows how sober I will be, because I really enjoy the bars in Portsmouth.
It's a fun town. It's a really cool town, and it's I recommend it for people. I really think a lot of people really had fun last time. That's why we got such good speakers. You know, these are busy people. They wouldn't come to such a tiny conference, but it's fun. It's just a cool place, and I think people should move here. I really do. If you depending on how much money you make, you could end up getting a 28% raise just by moving here.
Yeah.
Just from the tax savings. Not to mention your cost of living is cheaper. You can if you like land, you can get a lot of land. You know, there's just cool things. If you like city, you could be in a town like Portsmouth. I think it's great. And the Free Staters are great people. If you like you know, kind of Adam Kokesh style anarchists, you'll find hundreds of them.
Yeah.
If you like kind of the opposite end of kind of like really quiet, leave me aloneists, you'll find plenty of them, and you'll find people all in between, and even the non-Free Staters. I mean, it's just a good group of people. I've talked to a lot of people that I've met since I moved here who have nothing to do with the Free State Project, don't know anything about it, but they still have that kind of voluntarist, you know, attitude of just sort of like, yeah, you know, we do our own thing, help each other out. It's much more community. You don't see a lot of that heavy-handed government that you see elsewhere when you're doing your paperwork and stuff like that. It's pretty cool.
Well, Bruce, I am. We're coming to the end here. I'm glad to have you here in New Hampshire, and I'm glad
that you're
moved,
here.
Yeah, I'm glad you moved just a little bit before me. I think that it makes it all the better having having intelligent people who are about liberty and super knowledgeable to help move this space forward, because I think it is the most important thing that we could be doing right now is to move this monetary system to one that's more free, and you're doing a huge work there. So thank you so much for that, Bruce. Well, I'm going to be promoting your conference. I will definitely be there. I'm sure that I will see you before then, though. But thank you so much for being on the show, and we'll have you on.
Thank you, Vin. It's great to see you. I'm glad to have you in New Hampshire too. It's good. You're practicing what you preach. You know, I was glad to see, because I always thought of you as kind of like a L.A., New York, Vegas kind of guy. You know, when you came to my farm, you had your really nice shoes, and you stepped in the mud. You know, so it's good to see you out in the and by the way, New Hampshire is not all country like that.
Right.
There's plenty of city, like Vin says. There's bars and downtown that I think is just as cool. I think Portsmouth is like a mini New York neighborhood. I mean, you got everything you want. You have Himalayan food, every kind of bar, if that's your thing. But I was really glad to see you come here too. And I think you belong here. So
Thanks,
it's cool, and it's been great to be on the show and great to catch up.
Thanks, brother. We'll have you again. See you soon.
Thanks. Sounds good. See ya.
Christian, got your audio. Yeah, Bruce is a great guy, man. He's a great guy.
He's awesome.
Yeah, we gotta get you. Everybody's like, when is Christian coming? That's all I hear. I'm getting tired of hearing it. I'm getting tired of hearing it. They're like, when is Christian coming? How do we get Christian here? When is Christian? I literally heard it yesterday from the executive director of the Free State Project. I had coffee with her, and she's like, "What's going on with Christian? How can we get Christian out?" So maybe Liberty Forum, maybe that conference. That might be a cool conference to come out for. Something simple, meet some folks. I'd rather you were at something bigger like Liberty Forum or whatnot, but we'll get you out here. Don't worry. There's a lot of people.
All right.
But
yeah.
Bruce is one of those individuals who has been on the forefront of so many things. I think that he's the type of individual that you follow. You know, where it's like he's actually not trying to convince people. He just is someone who speaks his truth. You know, and I love that, and I think that it's poignant to the conversation that we had, that it's like there are these individuals who are knowledgeable, smart, passionate, friendly, you know, just great people who want to be around great people, and they think, hey, here's a way to go, and I'm going to go this way, and if you want to come along, let's do it, let's have fun, you know, and I'm all about that. So we're relatively close to the end of the show. Maybe we ended early, unless you had something on your mind.
No, not that I can think of.
No. All right. Well, then yeah, let's get out of here early. I'll go. Maybe I'll go to the park or something. It's a nice day outside. At least I'll go out and get in my backyard and see if I can see any of the wildlife out there. So, all right, dude. Hey, thanks for today, brother. It was a great show.
Thank you.
Let me say goodbye to the people. Thank you all so much for tuning in today. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks, of course, to Bruce Fenton, my guest, who is probably on a plane right now, so he's not going to even be able to see his interview until he lands. But once again, one of the wonderful people here in New Hampshire. His event is coming up in October, so you can go and check that out. Also, anybody else who wants to come and check out New Hampshire, also going on in Portsmouth just the month before is Free Coast Fest. So maybe you got a whole month off and you want to stay for both of them. But it's a chance to get out to the seacoast, and it's absolutely gorgeous that time of year. So would love to see you guys. And if you're ever planning on coming to New Hampshire, hit me up, show@vinarmani.com, or if you have any other questions or comments. If you want to check out our audio, if you want to listen to us on podcasts and subscribe, we love that. You can do that on iTunes and Stitcher. But if you just want to tune in to our live show, which we do appreciate, then you can always do that. And the next time you can do that is next Monday at 10 a.m. Pacific time. And until then, stay free.